right, so here it comes. Alan Dershowitz, the public intellectual. And we have an amazing group of people, and I have the challenging task of limiting their time, because when we are done, we will also watch a video of tributes from people all over, so I want to make sure we have time to do that. We again will go alphabetically, and we're going to start with Irwin Cotler, who's former Attorney General of Canada, former Minister of Justice, member of the Parliament, Mount Royal, one of the leading human rights advocates of our time. Irwin, we're so honored that you're here.
Thank you, Martha, and I'm delighted to be here. To be able to share in the common cause which brings us together, which, as it has been spoken of, is a celebration of Alan's life in the law. But if I may add to that in terms of what has been said this afternoon, a life in the pursuit of justice. Alan has lived, embodied, exemplified what my parents, what his parents sought to teach us. It was my father who taught me before I could understand the profundity of his words, as he taught me as a young child, that the pursuit of justice, as he put it, is equal to all the other commandments combined. And then he would add, this is what you should teach onto your children. And Alan has been engaged in that kind of intergenerational teaching. But I have to say that it was my mother, not unlike Alan's mother, who would say to me when she heard my father teach me this, that if you want to pursue justice, then you have to understand, you have to feel the injustice about you. Otherwise, the pursuit of justice is a theoretical construct. Otherwise, it's an abstraction. You have to go in and about your community and beyond, feel the injustice and combat the injustice. And Alan's life has really been one of confronting, of challenging, of combating the injustice. And in that sense, he has been what I would call the consummate public intellectual. Indeed, at a time when, and I was reading up what is a public intellectual, and a number of the articles, I won't go into it, have lamented the fact that there are no public intellectuals today. That in fact there are no, in particular, they put any authoritative public intellectuals. I think, Alan, you have given the word public intellectual its meaning, its essence, and its resonance. You have been, in fact, engaged in the great public issues of the day, beyond the academy, on a global scale. I would say you're not only a public intellectual in the best sense of the word, but a global public intellectual. A person who has engaged the Israeli and Palestinian leaders respectively, and I've been able to witness this, in the pursuit of peace as an expression of the pursuit of justice, who has challenged the prevailing dogma of the day, and Martha Minos put this so well, in terms of putting the challenging questions as part of being a consummate democratic public intellectual. You've opened up the public space of dialogue. You've opened up the public space and parameters of exchange. And in that Boston Red Sox cap that Martha Minow gave you today, that epigram about, questioning authority, about drawing upon an unparalleled reservoir of knowledge, being what I would say a true Renaissance legal scholar, as Paul Finkelman put it in that Albany Law Conference to which reference was made, and I'll just quote from that Alan has had a greater impact on more areas of the law than any other legal scholar. That has made you, Alan, not only a Renaissance legal scholar, but indeed has made you a Renaissance public intellectual, because you have written not only comprehensively and effectively in constitutional law, criminal law, international law, human rights law, psychoanalysis, psychiatry law, in evidence, procedure, legal history, legal ethics, legal theory, legal process, the legal profession, and as Martha Minow has put it, your novels have had have had also a scholarly aspect. But most important, and for those of us who've had the privilege to read your works over the years, and you will understand what I mean, you are writing in all of these areas whenever you are writing in one of these areas. And that is why that I say that you are a Renaissance public intellectual. A unique Renaissance public intellectual through your teaching and through your scholarship, just as your scholarship underpins your teaching and your teaching underpins your scholarship, where you advocate in your scholarship, which is scholarly in its advocacy. And finally, what distinguishes, I think and we've heard this today, it's a recurrent theme which gives it the validity of that kind of individual and collective appreciation. What distinguishes you as a preeminent global public intellectual is not only the moral clarity, the compelling moral clarity that you bring to that public dialogue, but the overriding moral courage that is underlying your engagement, your involvement as a public intellectual. Harvey Silverglade earlier quoted me more eloquently than when I first wrote it, my remarks about your unflinching moral courage, about your willingness and ability to stand up and be counted, and not look around to see whoever else is standing before you make a judgment to do so, particularly in a world in which few people are prepared to stand up, let alone to be counted. The important thing here is that I've been able to say this, or to write this, because I've been able, like so many here, to witness this. To witness you, whether it be standing up to the wrath of the Soviet Union as it then was in the defense of Soviet dissidents, or standing up to the wrath of your own government in so many of your defenses, or standing up to the political correctness of the day, or standing up for the legions of the non-celebrities, for the politically incorrect causes, as Alan Stone put it, standing up for your students, being the man without a mask, being the first Jewish Jew at Harvard Law School, in effect, for standing up for truth in the pursuit of justice. And so you are, in a word, and with this I close, the ultimate teacher, scholar, advocate, the ultimate domestic and global public intellectual, and never to be forgotten, the ultimate friend. A unique combination of head, heart, and soul. And we thank you.
Thank you, Irwin. That was terrific. Joel Pollack, who was on the last panel, reminded me of a story that I just have to share, which is there was a time when at Harvard there was a display of national flags, and Palestinian students were offended because their flag wasn't there because they weren't recognized as a nation. So who went to bat for them? Alan Dershowitz went to bat for them and got them the right to have the flag hung. But once it was hung, he stood next to it handing out flyers against the Palestinian arguments. That is Alan Dershowitz. I am so delighted and honored to welcome Irving Greenberg, Rabbi Greenberg, who is a well-known scholar and author. He's a strong supporter of Israel. He's a promoter of greater ecumenical understanding, and we're delighted to welcome you here to Harvard Law School.
Considering the extraordinary range of Alan Dershowitz's issues and teachings that you've all heard about all day as a public intellectual, and considering the extraordinary range and distinction of this panel with many different perspectives, I decided I would like to focus briefly on that which has most interested me personally, obviously, in my lifetime, his role as a Jewish public intellectual, or if you will, the relationship between his Jewish identity and his public wisdom. Now consider for a moment, and I think he's a really extraordinary role model in this way, which I would like to hold out for a moment. Consider all the areas of his strong personal, professional, and advocacy roles: constitutional rights, human rights, international human rights, freedom of speech and expression, opposition to censorship, opposition to death penalty, individual rights and the struggle to reconcile that and protect that against the preventive state, defense of the unpopular and the execrated. Well, of course, obviously these are classic examples of universal issues of human rights and freedom. And it's no secret that these are areas that have disproportionately attracted the attention of Jewish academics and public intellectuals, totally disproportionate to their role in the population. However, historically, it has attracted what Isaac Deutscher has particularly called non-Jewish Jews. That is to say, Jews who, in search of universal redemption or universal rights, have frequently felt either estranged from their identity or perhaps even a need to distance from the community and from those values in order to prove the universal bona fides. Judaism itself is a dialectical religion. It has a universal image, a universal vision of humanity and human redemption. It has an eschatology that speaks of a messianic perfection for the whole world, not just the Jewish people. But it simultaneously insisted that this universal perfection will be achieved through the participation and the distinctive roles of this particular people and of other particular people, of multiple covenants that God has made with many people and with humanity itself. It's gone further, insisted that the test and the reliability and authenticity of the universal redemption is that they achieve that without overriding or destroying or scanting the particular. It's even frequently pointed out that one of the early warning systems and tests of the dignity and validity of redemptive movements are their freedom from or their proneness to anti-Semitism and other forms of minority discrimination. In the modern period, this dialectic has broken apart, and in the search for universal achievement, universal acceptance, maybe universal redemption, often the Jews or the individual Jews have sought to deny or turn their back on the particularism, and this took the other form too, which Alan has written about, which is that those who stayed Jewish have been tempted, and many have slipped into kind of a tribal internal environment that is forgotten about or turns us back on the vision of universal redemption and talks about Jewish survival and, for that matter, Jewish danger and the need for Jews to hang together. So in this sense, this problem of the non-Jewish Jews' inability to reconcile their Jewishness with their vision and their redemptive hopes has been particularly strong on the left, particularly in the hard left, and of course it has had serious consequences for Jewish participation in these movements. One classic example I'm sure many of you are familiar with is the story of Rosa Luxemburg, one of the great founders of socialism, of communism, socialism in the German and other in Poland, who out of her drive to save humanity and to bring dignity to the oppressed, really ended up or felt the need to totally deny her Jewish background. When she was imprisoned in 1917 for her revolutionary activities, and some friends wrote to her and complained about that the Jews in Russia, where the revolution was getting underway, were particularly being destroyed and persecuted and attacked, she wrote back, "What do you want with this theme of special suffering of the Jews? I'm just as much concerned with the poor victims of the rubber plantations of Putumayo, the blacks in Africa whose corpses the Europeans play catch with. When so many cries of anguish have faded away unheard, they resound with me so strongly I have no special place in my heart for the Jewish ghetto. I feel at home in the entire world, wherever there are clouds and birds and human tears." The problem, of course, is not just the obvious denial of oneself and one's background and family. The problem is that that need led to another step, and not just for her, of course, which is a kind of a hatred or a rejection or anger at Jewish phenomena, in her case, the Bund, which Jewish Socialist Party, which she proposed the way to put it briefly to treat the entire Bund, which they deserve at the least, is to have any upstanding, respectable person throw them down the stairs the minute they open the door. For this, it's best to live on the fourth floor. They are individuals who have only two elements, duplicity and cunning, etc., etc., etc. And of course, one thinks her denial when she heard the reports of the anti-Semitism, her insistence, it could not be. The Russian Revolution could not possibly be dangerous for the Jews. Those are rumors of a kind that are directly fabricated. The time of pogroms has passed once and for all. The strength of the workers and of socialism there is much too strong for that. In other words, the denial of the pathologies, which then made people incapable of identifying what was going wrong with the very dream that they had of saving the world. One thinks of the Yevseksia, who under Stalin led in the persecution and closing of Jewish institutions to prove their bona fides as true communists who were trying to bring universal redemption for everybody. This problem, of course, persists particularly on the hard left, but on the left, on the liberal left, down to our time when I give you as a poster child the New York Times, which, in order to prove that it was not a Jewish newspaper, scanted, slighted, obscured, suppressed coverage of the Holocaust throughout that period. And Max Frankel, its editor, acknowledged that 50 years later, of course, when the matter was no longer relevant. And its performance today, to prove that it's not a Jewish newspaper, which Alan has repeatedly called it on, by exhaustively maligning or at least indicting the state of Israel using a double standard in which much graver violations are overlooked and in which a kind of a continuous moral equivalence between terror and rejectionism and self-defense. Of course, Alan has played a major role in critiquing and challenging that, but I think the ability to do that grows out of the health, the internal self-acceptance, and the healthy rootedness in his own Jewish identity. As a healthy Jewish identity, he was able to identify the Russian persecution of Soviet Jewry and suppression of its cultural religious life early, became, of course, Natan Sharansky's lawyer with Irwin Cotler, and, of course, important pioneers in bringing principles of international human rights and law to bear and to force even totalitarian governments to acknowledge and to begin to be bound in some way by these rules. And again, out of the strength of his own conviction, not only of justice, but of his ease with his own Jewish identity, willing to challenge and ask the United States government to use its leverage, its power, to force the Russian government to change its policies, not deterred, say, as Henry Kissinger was, in arguing that it would be selfish and excessive self-interest for Jews to ask for trade retaliation against Russia because that would somehow disrupt the American search for détente. Dershowitz had the inner courage to realize that justice is inseparable, and the ability to pressure a totalitarian government to acknowledge justice in this area would open the door to the breakdown of the whole system of intimidation and acknowledgement of justice in the entire society. He has, of course, continued to practice this classically in his defense of Israel. We're here again, and this is why I want to add as a second dimension, not only that of the comfort enabled to juggle the universal in particular, but in even a deeper level, to harness the particular experience of the Jewish people or the Jewish issues to a deeper wisdom and a more integral honesty in all the policies that one follows. So having seen the double standard practice in Israel, having gone to Israel and seen the struggle, what it means to really resist 60 years of rejectionism and terror, and how one, under those circumstances, struggles to balance civil rights, and we've heard about it earlier today in very eloquent ways by the judges, how one really makes reality responses and at the same time protects and restricts the danger of erosion of those very values that I'm trying to protect. He's been a model of fighting the double standard, of seeing Israel's needed defense itself against terror, and therefore has led some of his most challenging and brilliant insights the challenge of warrants for torture or warrants for detention in this country. Again, he applied what he learned in Israel to the challenge of reconciling America's search for security against terrorism with the protection of the ongoing democratic and justice system. That quality, of course, he has applied not just to Israel or to the Jewish issues, that call for accountability, transparency, for a dialogue in which these are articulated and therefore people take responsibility and expose themselves to their criticism, that it's not just left to the lower echelons, but that those who are in charge really take responsibility, including the guilt which is implicit in any ethics exercised by people who have power, but a guilt that therefore becomes creative and drives you to not sell out and not corrupt and not lose your values. That, I think, all has come from his own remarkable ability to understand the ancient but, I think, eternal Jewish teaching that how we practice our universal rights always has to take into account the human dimension, the individual, the concrete, the particular. And in the interaction of the two, in the insight in which one broadens the other and reminds it of its ultimate vision and direction, and on the other hand, how the particular challenges the universal, never to lose its human dimension, never to overlook the individual, the exception, the challenge. That model, I think, has really been a remarkable contribution to public intellectual status, particularly important in our generation, where polarization, where people and creation of whole networks of people communicating only with each other has tempted each side to see its own complete correction and to dismiss or demean the other. That ability that you heard this afternoon, therefore, to shape and to profoundly touch conservative as well as liberal students, I think that dialectic remains a role model for all of us and a remarkable expression of the unique contribution he has made as a public intellectual.
Geraldo Rivera, you may not know, is a lawyer as well as one of the most famous journalists in this country. Regularly on Fox News, he hosts a program called Geraldo at Large. He remains a hero for me forever for exposing the world of closed mental institutions when nobody was paying attention. Geraldo Rivera.
Thanks, Dean. When Dean Minow invited me and she said the topic was public intellectual, the first name that came to mind was the first person that I remember interviewing under that moniker was Alan Bloom at the University of Chicago. He'd just written a book called The Closing of the American Mind. And so I had just been fired from ABC News because of a beef I had with Roone Arledge over a documentary on the Kennedy family and their relationship with Marilyn Monroe. Anyway, I was the most famous unemployed person in America. I got a job as a talk show. It hadn't started yet, but I was working on Entertainment Tonight in the meantime, and I said, I'm going to bring intellectuals to the air. I'm going to show them that I can do, a different level of popular news. So I went to Chicago. I interviewed Alan Bloom about The Closing of the American Mind, and I brought the senior producer with me, Steve Skinner. I remember to this day. He, in fact, had worked with me at Eyewitness News back in the early 70s and had executive produced the Willowbrook expose. So Steve Skinner and I were there, and we were on the campus of the University of Chicago, and there was Professor Bloom. And the topic was The Closing of the American Minds, which you may remember was on the bestseller list almost as long as Alan's book. So I think it was 4 months at number one on the nonfiction list. So I'm interviewing Professor Bloom about being a public intellectual. And he starts talking and talking and talking in very complex sentences, and I was trying to match him, a typical Brooklyn Law School graduate, feisty, trying to hold my own against this intellectual giant. He's talking about relativism and the corrosion, the destruction of the great works and how they're being ignored in liberal education. Anyway, I interviewed him for about 45 minutes. And at the end of it, I say to the producer, after I thanked Professor Bloom, I say to Steve Skinner, I said, hey, what'd you think? He said, what the hell did he say? And we ended up using one 20-second soundbite about Mick Jagger being a foil for the establishment, and that is his pseudo-erotic, packaging, but he was just and so, the term public intellectual and popular newscast really didn't jibe. It didn't, it didn't work out as smoothly as I thought that this transition would. And then in the 80s, a couple of years later, the whole von Bülow thing happened, and there was Alan Dershowitz, Professor Dershowitz, and how did he reduce this complex case where everyone thought this man was obviously guilty, and everyone was talking about the trappings of his wealth and how he had gone to do this to Sonny to get the wealth, and the children of von Bülow, you don't remember, really had formed the victims' rights movement. So there was the victims' rights movement, very sympathetic, children of the comatose Sonny von Bülow. Very, very powerful image they created, and there, on the other hand, was Professor Dershowitz mounting the appeal in that case. And what do you remember? Do you remember the children and the victims' rights movement? You remember no insulin, no insulin. And so the appeal, which of course was successful, also propelled this man to the fore in a program I later did, and I maintain that of all of his credits that you're paying attention to, and rightfully so, as after 50 years and 30 books and 75 years on Earth, everybody is celebrating. The one credit I think people are missing at the point is that he really became the first of television, first lawyer of the television age, the first attorney who could go on television and take a relatively complex set of facts and circumstances and reduce them to a soundbite is, I guess, a frivolous or cheap way of suggesting it, but really to an understandable concept where not only did he have law and precedent and meticulous research to make his argument, he also presented it in a way that my mom, Lily Friedman, could understand. And then, in 1994, when I was hired by my current boss at Fox News, but then he was on a new network. He had two networks. He had CNBC and another network called America's Talking that later became MSNBC. Roger hired me in 1994. We were meandering around. I wasn't exactly sure what this new program was going to be until, lo and behold, there on the freeways of California was a white Bronco being driven by an NFL superstar we had all adored, a man who had run 2,000 yards in the snow in Buffalo, and there was O.J. Simpson accused of double murder, and he put together this dream team, and lo and behold, there's Professor Alan Dershowitz, who later became a fixture on my program, Rivera Live, on a regular basis, communicating to the audience, the Simpson case for sure, and specifically, and I'll talk about that a little bit as we go on, but more broadly, other cases that he wasn't particularly or specifically or personally involved with, but he could take these concepts, reduce them to an argument where you say, of course he's right. How could he not be right? And to watch as he developed this new profession, the lawyer as television pundit, was something that's so extraordinary and so persuasive. When you now see, and I go back and check the record, prior to 1994, it was very rare. So occasionally you see Charlie Ness in there, and he mentored me. But generally speaking, lawyers avoided or were avoided. They were not included in the guest list of the various programs, nor were legal cases, complicated cases, much discussed until the era of Dershowitz. When he came on board with I don't think that he coined the phrase, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit, but he reduced these concepts to precepts that were just as understandable as that. And it was so to watch him, and to watch even in the wake of what was arguably the least popular jury verdict in the history of at least white America, to see him defend that on the law. To see him defend it in a lawyer-like way that was populist enough that everybody got, even though we despised the conclusion of the jury in acquitting a man I maintain to this day was guilty of a double homicide. Still, the fact is that, led largely by Professor Dershowitz, and he had the secret weapon of fax machines, and later we found out, half his class, if not the entire class here at Harvard, he managed to put a face on that where you could not argue with his conclusion as that team went ahead with their work. They impeached the state's DNA evidence. They impeached the star witness Mark Furman by catching him in a deceit, in a conflicting statement. And then as we progressed from the Simpson case, and he even explains in one of his books how he couldn't even go into his own temple to defend that, but as in the context of Rivera Live, in the context of this new profession that he was the architect of largely, he was making populist enough and accessible enough the nuts and bolts of that decision, and then moving on. He talked about everything from Gary Condit to the impeachment and the evidence against Bill Clinton in terms of the impeachment in 1998. And I must say, going forward into the aughts and up to present day, when you need a go-to lawyer, when you need someone to make a case, when you need someone to make an argument, a compelling argument, there is still none better. But remember my main headline. In all of the accolades, he was the first, he was the best of all the TV lawyers. So he's a great intellectual, a great author, and all the rest of it. But man, that guy can deliver a soundbite.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is a real lawyer. So Ken Sweder is a partner, Sweder and Ross, and he has held very interesting positions at Brandeis University, at the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs. He's a civic leader, and he's going to tell us the truth about Alan.
Here's the truth. Knowing that I was going to be following Geraldo, I thought that I would talk about Alan before live audiences, because that's a very special thing. As a friend for 35 years, I have seen him address live audiences countless times. I don't want to say too many, but countless times. As a social justice and Jewish activist, I've shared the platform with him. I've introduced him. He's introduced me many, many times. And it is Alan, the public intellectual, speaking to these live audiences that I want to talk about. My thinking about this all came together a couple of weeks ago when I was a guest lecturer in his legal ethics class. What I heard in that class was Alan speaking in the way I heard him speak so many times to these live audiences. He was wonderfully incisive and insightful, but he engaged the class as he engages the live audiences by respecting the intelligence of the audience, by respecting that those listening to him have different views from him and often come from different places than he in all sorts of ways, by respecting his audience by being uncompromisingly honest about his own opinions and what he has to say, and by respecting his audience by speaking to them person to person, using his own background and experiences and humor to educate and persuade them. He doesn't pontificate. He does not talk over his audiences. He does not attempt to hide behind or impress with legalese or any other ease. This is getting to what Geraldo said. He can really talk straight talk, and he does every single time. That's extremely rare, and he has the rarest, almost unique talent in his ability to do that, and it is stunningly effective. You can see that at the end of these talks when I'd be waiting to go out for a drink or for dinner, and people would come around, and the audience all would seem to feel as if he was addressing them personally in some way, and they all seem to feel as if he will be, as he always is, completely accessible and approachable with respect to the points they want to make and the questions they want to ask. Getting back to that legal ethics class, I want to say that we explored a lawyer's choice as to whether or not to take a case, as to whether or not to represent a particular client. And I thought that Alan's handling of the racial, religious, national, and gender issues involved in those questions was one of the most straightforward, natural, down-to-earth, but elevated discussions involving these issues that I've ever heard. And the students responded accordingly. There's one moment that stands out for me amongst these 35 years of listening to him, to live audiences. And that was when President Carter was invited to speak to Brandeis following his controversial book. Alan wanted to debate him and challenged Carter's coming to Brandeis and speaking undebated. President Carter did not want to debate Alan, as you might imagine. Good choice on his part. So Alan and Carolyn and Jerry, my wife, and I, we went to the president's office. We watched the thing on closed TV. And then Alan went out and did a counter session. And as usual, he was brilliant, and he was incisive, and he was to the point. And during the question and answer period, this is what impressed me about that time. A young Palestinian woman spoke about the humiliation she suffered at the West Bank checkpoints. I don't even know if Alan remembers this, but I do. I think that most all speakers, including me, who was faced with that kind of question, and this was a very moving young woman, would have been completely nonplussed. They would have fallen all over themselves, maybe to offer apologies. But Alan answered in pure Alan form. He was respectful to her. He spoke directly and personal to her. And he told her that although there should certainly be no conduct by the IDF at these checkpoints which would cause undue hardships or humiliation in any way, if there was a choice to be made between protecting the citizens of Israel, as he believed there had to be with checkpoints at that point in time, and subjecting people to an inherently inconvenient and humiliating to some degree experience by having to go through the checkpoint, he has to choose the checkpoints. Again, he was straightforward, he was honest, he was fearless in his answer, he was respectful, and he was pure Alan. And although he has been attacked from both the right and the left on Israel, there is no one there on that day who could or did fault him for the way he treated and answered that young Palestinian woman. There's only one other session I want to talk about. It was Alan as a public intellectual in a private setting. I was approached some years ago to see if I could get Alan to make a call to a family Thanksgiving dinner in which the patriarch of the family, a very successful athletic guy, had become a quadriplegic as the result of a bicycle accident. Alan did it. He did it for an hour. He was reported to me that he was brilliant, completely engaged, as was the entire family. It was the highlight of that year for that family. And the bottom line for me is that even as a public intellectual, Alan is, as a friend, as a family man, a real mensch. And we, all of us who have spoken today and all in the audience, are very lucky to know him and to have worked with him. Thank you.
So after this panel, we have 2 more to go, and Alan will get a rebuttal. We have a video of more people who want to say something, so just keep that in mind. Jeffrey Toobin, when he was a Harvard undergraduate, had a column at the Harvard Crimson that carried the name Inner Toobin, and he has been a journalist all of his life, as well as a distinguished alum of this law school, where he was an outstanding student and member of the Harvard Law Review. You know him from CNN, you know him from The New Yorker. I'm going to shut up. Jeffrey, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Martha. At 8:30 in the morning, on my first day as a student at Harvard Law School, I went to criminal law in Alan Dershowitz's criminal law class. Now, we all know how much Alan hates name dropping, but he was just telling President Clinton the other day that it's just something he disdains completely. But I can't resist mentioning that one of the other students in the class, of course, was Justice Kagan, and who was not a justice then. And the first case we discussed was Robinson versus California. And I didn't have to look that up. I remember it to this day. It's a fascinating case. Doesn't get talked about a lot. It's a case about whether you can be prosecuted for this being the status of being an alcoholic, not any sort of drunken activity, but can you be prosecuted for being an alcoholic? And it was a completely riveting class, and I loved that class from day one. That was also the time that Alan was really emerging as a tremendous force in the broader American world. It was the time he was working on the von Bulow appeal. And it was also the time, I believe, that he started posting on his wall much of the hate mail he got. Martha mentioned it earlier. In his book, Taking the Stand, his new book, he quotes some of the hate mail that he gets, but he left out my favorite, which I remember to this day. It was actually not a letter to Alan. It was a letter to James Vorenberg, who was the dean of Harvard Law School at the time. And the letter, I believe, word for word, was, "Dear Dean Vorenberg, why do you let Alan Dershowitz make such an ass of himself on TV?" And Dean Vorenberg wrote back, "Because it gives me pleasure," which I just thought was so great. And that was on his wall, which I remember. And it was shortly before that I arrived at Harvard Law School that Alan wrote a book. I haven't heard it mentioned here yet. I wasn't here earlier in the day, which is to me one of the life-changing books that I've ever read, which is The Best Defense, the first of the 3 volumes of autobiography that Alan has written. It is a book that is, the lawyer's dream of war stories. I mean, as the Shooting the Corpse and the Tyson brothers, and it's all these unforgettable stories. But it's also a story about how law actually works in the United States of America, and it begins with certain rules which are told in the usual sort of caged, narrow, technical, legalistic way Alan talks, like all cops lie. Virtually all defendants are guilty of everything they're charged with. Everyone knows this. And this as a counterpoint to the everyday business of Harvard Law School, which is the reading of appellate opinions and the parsing of doctrine, was the most wonderful contrast and the most useful education. Because you can't learn about how law works in the United States simply by reading appellate court opinions. And Alan, I think, recognized that much more than many of his predecessors, and gave us, I think, a rounded education in what law really meant. Now, shortly after I graduated from law school, I worked as a prosecutor for several years, and then I went to work at The New Yorker, later at ABC and CNN as a journalist. And, of course, the big break in my career was the O.J. Simpson case. That was the big story that made such a difference to me. And, of course, Alan was one of the dream team. Now, you might ask, why did Alan take that case? Well, one possibility is, because he thought a tremendous injustice might be done by convicting him. No, I don't think that was it. As Geraldo said, so guilty. But the point about the O.J. Simpson case was it was such a tremendous learning experience for the country. And, Alan was both a member of the team and frequently on Geraldo's show, such a wonderful spokesman for what the rules are and how you can't just dislike somebody and you can't just be appalled by a previous conviction for domestic violence to convict someone of such of a crime like that. And notwithstanding the fact that I certainly disagreed with the verdict in the case, I thought Alan did a tremendous public service and has always done a tremendous service, particularly on television. And it's just someone else I'd like to mention here who also did, a contemporary and a colleague of Alan's for many years, Arthur Miller, who was also a real pioneer in using television as a vehicle to tell stories that were true but necessarily at least somewhat simplified. And Alan has continued to do that in story after story. We have worked together now in many years on many stories over the years. We were just doing the Boston Marathon bombing case, but I'd just like to conclude by talking about one case in particular, and that, as I believe someone mentioned earlier, was Eliot Spitzer's. He was never arrested. Eliot Spitzer's implication in the prostitution ring. I was then, as I am now, CNN senior legal analyst, and I was obviously talking about it a lot. And I knew, as I suspect many of you knew, that when I was a law student, there were two students of Alan's. They were a year ahead of me, 2 years ahead of me, Cliff Sloan, who I knew from college, and Eliot Spitzer, who were working with Alan on the defense of von Bülow. And through Cliff, I got to know Eliot, and I've known him for all these years. And just to fast forward ahead, when Eliot was implicated, the most striking thing about what happened was the profound silence of Eliot's friends, of Democrats in New York, of anyone who would say a decent word about Eliot Spitzer. There was no one. I mean, it was just astonishing. Here you have someone this powerful. There were no Democratic members of the legislature. There were no pundits. There was nobody. And it was such a dramatic contrast, to another story we were involved in together, which was the Clinton thing, which was when the Clinton-Lewinsky story came, there were endless numbers of people who were ready to defend Bill Clinton, but there was nobody to defend Eliot Spitzer except Alan Dershowitz. And it underlined to me not just his tremendous skill as a lawyer, his tremendous integrity, his communication skills, but also just his decency and his friendship, his value as a friend. And I just admired the fact so much that Alan was there speaking up for Eliot when absolutely no one else would. Unfortunately for Eliot, not enough people voted for him for controller a couple of weeks ago, but it is something that seemed to me to sum up Alan's decency and his general all-around terrificness, and I'm delighted to be here to pay tribute to him.
So I'm looking over at Jeffrey's notes, and I see modesty was the first topic. You skipped over that one, but
you know what? I since you mention it,
okay.
I just wanted to say I know we were short of time here, but since you raised the issue, Martha, I know how painful it is for Alan to be the center of attention, and I just wanted to thank him for agreeing to this and to do this, because I know it must be awful for you. His modesty and humility will be the focuses of day 2, 3, and 4 of this session.
So we're just thrilled that the last member of this panel is Judge Mark Wolf, former Chief Judge of the Federal District Court here in Boston, and also a public intellectual in his own right. So, Judge Wolf.
Martha, present.
President Ronald Reagan, who appointed me as a United States District Judge in 1985, said you should never be in a movie with dogs or children. And if he were here today, he said you shouldn't be on a panel with so many distinguished speakers where you're called upon to speak after Geraldo Rivera and Jeff Toobin particularly. Everybody's been so eloquent. But this panel does give me a unique opportunity to recall a telephone conversation I had with Alan in June of 1998. I had just ordered the Department of Justice and the FBI to reveal publicly that Whitey Bulger was an FBI informant. And having worked for the Attorney General of the United States and been a prosecutor myself, I felt this was a legally correct decision, but I was really wondering how it would be received, since it had the prospect of letting about 8 notorious alleged murderers off because of a flawed indictment and government misconduct. Alan called me up and said, I'm going to be on Geraldo Rivera's television program tonight talking about your recent decision. I thought you might want to watch. I admit that this was not my regular viewing, although perhaps it should have been, but I confess. I turned it on, and there was Alan, and I recall former U.S. Attorney Joe DeGeneva and many others talking about this case. And after Alan made his presentation, Geraldo said, that judge must be one pissed-off hombre. And I must say that I've been called many things, some not that flattering, but that's probably the most memorable. So it's a particular pleasure to share the platform with you. Public intellectuals don't exist in a vacuum. I think if you're a public intellectual and an influential one, as Alan is, it's because you're in a colloquy with other people who think deeply, engage their attention, and that colloquy promotes greater understanding. As I've thought, and it was only just a little, about what to say today, 3 incidents came to mind, 2 of them within the last month. Last Wednesday at the federal courthouse, I moderated a conversation with the former Justice of the South African Supreme Court, Albie Sachs. As some of you may know, Justice Sachs was a member of the African National Congress, courageously so. Indeed, a car he was in Mozambique was blown up and he lost an arm. He was an ally of Nelson Mandela's. He was an architect of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission and a founding member of its Supreme Court, appointed by Mandela. I didn't know he was going to say this in his 30-minute remarks, but sitting in our courthouse, he said, I recall when Alan Dershowitz came to South Africa, and he wrote all the justices and says, I'll be there on a particular day, and I'm available for about an hour. And Justice Sachs said many of his, and I doubt this is quite right, Alan's frowning, and I'm skeptical too, but he said, many of my colleagues said, what is this? And I said, this is a man I want to know. And he and Alan got together. They started talking about many things, including Justice Sachs said his aspirations for the new courthouse that he was in charge of working with the architects to develop in South Africa, built on Robben Island where Mandela was imprisoned for so many years. And Alan told him, I'm going to be having Passover Seder in a few days with Supreme Court Justice Steve Breyer, who was one of the architects of our fabulous courthouse in Boston. And Alan introduced Justice Sachs and Justice Breyer, and Justice Sachs talked about how much Alan's intervention and that introduction helped him conceptualize an appropriate courthouse, an important public place in South Africa. A month ago today, a young friend of mine, Kirk Johnson, man about 32 years old, published a book called To Be a Friend is Fatal. It's a powerful and passionate book about his experience working in Iraq for USAID, the psychological and physical scars he received from that, and his absolutely determined effort to overcome the shameful policy of the United States, which refuses to admit Iraqis who have worked with us, as his interpreter did, and who are in peril because of their association with the United States. And Kirk is somebody I meet with periodically and try to give advice and assistance to. And as he told me about the very high hurdles to getting these Iraqis who've been vetted by the U.S. government before they're allowed to work with us into the United States because of the concern that some tiny fraction of these people might turn out to be terrorists, we started talking about, or he made some reference to Sodom and Gomorrah. So I gave him the chapter from Alan's book, Genesis of Justice. And from that, toward the conclusion of Kirk's book, he spins out this story of how the United States has turned the story, the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah on its head, in where Sodom and Gomorrah were spared because 10 righteous, just people could be found. Now all these righteous, just, imperiled people are being excluded from the United States because of a concern about a tiny fraction who may conceivably be dangerous, but really because of politics. I have to say, regretfully, as has often happened to Alan, Kirk also went on to write in a way that totally misunderstands Alan's positions after 9/11 about torture and other issues concerning combating terrorism. The third instance I'd like to relate goes back to July 15, 1991. I can remember the date because it's the only time I've ever had to do research to prepare for a dinner party. This story takes place on Martha's Vineyard, summer camp for public intellectuals and pretenders. Bob Brustein, who is here, may remember this story, I think with confidence that he knew it in real time. To put it in perspective, William Styron, a longtime summer resident of Martha's Vineyard, in 1976 wrote Sophie's Choice. As many, but not all of you may recall, in Sophie's Choice, a Polish Catholic woman, essentially because of the transgressions of her anti-Semitic father, is banished to Auschwitz. She goes with 2 children, and when she arrives, she is required to choose which will stay with her and which will go and die. And the story is in meaningful measure about the tormented life that she lives after that. In 1991, Alan published Chutzpah. He kindly gave me a copy, and in July every year, now 37 years, my family and I rent a home in Martha's Vineyard. And our home was not, at this time, was in Chilmark, not far from Alan's. But I knew Bill Styron, his wife, Rose, a wonderful poet and human rights activist, and I were especially close friends and tennis buddies, and I knew Bill too. And Bill saw me. He had been told by another author, John Marquand, that Alan had written about him in Chutzpah. And in Chutzpah, Alan had a chapter on the Holocaust in Auschwitz. And part of what he said was, the only difference between efforts to de-Judaize the Holocaust, such as those engaged in by some Polish authorities, and efforts to deny the Holocaust outright, is one of degree. The common claim of both the de-Judaizers and the Holocaust deniers is that there was no attempted genocide of Jewish people as such. De-Judaizing the Holocaust leads inexorably to denying that it ever took place. That is why concerned Jews become so incensed over efforts to universalize the murders committed by Hitler's Nazis during the war. That's a very provocative statement. To support it, Alan pointed out that it was only Jewish children who were rounded up, ingathered, as he said, and he wrote, "There were no entire families hunted down and murdered solely because they were Polish or Belgian or Hungarian or Ukrainian. There was no attempt to destroy the seed of the Polish people. The Sophies who had to choose which of their children would live and which would die were Jewish, William Styron's Sophie's choice notwithstanding." Then, to further support this, Alan dropped a footnote to Elie Wiesel, who wrote in the New York Times, "While in Auschwitz, has she ever, Sophie, run into Jewish prisoners? It seems to me that she's been put there so as to illustrate something that universalists have been claiming all along, namely that others also witnessed agony at Auschwitz." John Marquand, an author and friend of Bill Styron's, read this or heard of it and told Bill. Bill, 1991, is a fierce former Marine. He comes to me and says, "I want you to get your friend Dershowitz over for dinner at your house, and I'm going to let him have it." And the way he said it, I couldn't tell whether that was meant to be taken literally or metaphorically, because he was mad. And my concerns about that escalated when Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes, Bill Styron's very good friend, said to me, "I hear you're refereeing the Rumble in the Jungle tonight," referring to the Titanic battle in Zaire, as it was called at the time, between George Foreman and Muhammad Ali. But I did study for this. I reread Chutzpah, I reread Sophie's Choice, I took the notes that I found last night to prepare. And although Rose was out of town, Bill didn't want to be outnumbered. He came with a second. Carolyn was there. And with my wife, Linny, the six of us had dinner in this cabin we rented in the woods, overlooking the ocean. You couldn't see any other house. And when Bill and Alan came, I gave them each a drink. The sun was going down. I said, "You know, the two of you have so much in common. You write very thoughtful, nuanced things. They're caricatured, and then the caricatures, and you were viciously attacked." They agreed on that. We started a discussion. There were some factual issues that they disagreed on, and they ultimately agreed that each was right up to a point. We had a good discussion, and indeed, Alan and Bill eventually became friends. At the end of the evening, in this one-room downstairs cabin, Bill pulls out a big cigar. And I said to him, "Bill, Linny, my wife, is allergic to cigar smoke. Why don't you step out on the deck? We'll have another drink. You smoke your cigar." So we went out, and then I later learned after dinner, Alan, the ferocious public persona, had said, "I can't believe Mark told Bill he couldn't smoke a cigar inside. I can't stand cigar smoke, but I never would have said anything." And that helped, when I wrote a letter on his behalf, get him into Sutton Place, that they wouldn't be getting the public person. But more significantly, in January of 1993, about 18 months later, Bill Styron wrote a special essay in Newsweek about Auschwitz and Hiroshima, and he was, as a Marine, on his way to Japan at the time the bomb was dropped. It saved his life. But he wrote in this piece, long essay, that he was asked to do, the following. He says, "I've been criticized in some quarters for de-Judaizing and universalizing the Holocaust by creating in my novel, Sophie's Choice, a heroine who was a Gentile victim of Auschwitz. Such was not my intention. It was rather to show the malign effect of anti-Semitism and its relentless power of such breadth, at least in the Nazis' hands, as to be capable of destroying people beyond the focus of its immediate oppression. At Auschwitz, as in the Inferno, Jews occupied the center of hell, but the surrounding concentric rings embraced a multitude of other victims. It would be wrong for them to be forgotten." And what this illustrates, I think, exemplifies, is Alan's ability as a public intellectual to engage other profound thinkers in a way that gets them to think even more deeply and respond. And the continuing colloquy, I think, has educated Alan, has certainly educated me, and many others. Alan, when he made his last remarks that I heard, expressed some concern. I just want to try to pull something up, but he expressed some concern about ending his teaching career. He mentioned our friend Bob Nozick and all the books he didn't write and all that he didn't get to do and teach, explain after figuring it out himself. And I think, in a way, it's natural at this point, Alan, to think of one's own professional and indeed personal mortality. Charlie Nesson described you perfectly as I recall you when I came here in 1968, somebody who had great confidence and well-founded confidence in himself. I know you still have that, and I trust you have many years of your own energetic efforts. But I would like to end by saying, or reading, a very short poem that occurred to me when you made your remarks, because I hope that you have the confidence you deserve in your enduring power and influence as a teacher, not just of your students, but of your colleagues and your friends as well, and I'm proud to be among them. Emily Dickinson wrote, "The poets light but lamps, themselves go out. The wicks they stimulate, if vital light, in here as do the suns, each age a lens, disseminating their circumference." She anticipated you.
Rebuttal by Alan Dershowitz.
Just a very brief response. First, thank you for quoting Emily Dickinson. My daughter played Emily Dickinson on Martha's Vineyard last year in a play by Joyce Carol Oates, so it made me think very positive thoughts. I just want to say one brief thing. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate the diversity of your points of view. I just want to tell you about one painful thing in my own life. For 40 of the last 50 years of my career, I have been known around the country as a fervent liberal, as a supporter of free speech, a supporter of the First Amendment, an opponent of capital punishment, all of these things. And over the last 10 years, because I've spent a lot of the last 10 years defending Israel against a double standard. By the way, I'm in favor of the two-state solution. I've been against the settlements. I have not supported the government's policies on a great many issues, but I have generally demanded that the same standard of criticism be applied to Israel as to other countries. As the result of that, I am now widely regarded by young people around the country as a right-wing, neocon, Zio-fascist, you name it. It is absolutely remarkable how my general public reputation as a public intellectual has been geared only on the nonsense that if you support Israel, you must be a right-wing. I've never voted Republican I wouldn't even know how to pull the lever. I've never compromised my commitment to civil liberties and to human rights. But the issue of Israel has become so emotional. Phyllis Chesler calls it, the hatred toward Israel, eroticized hatred, that it has become almost impossible to have a rational discussion of the subject. But I want to tell you here tonight, as my audience, I will not change my views on Israel. I will not back down from my defense. My reputation be damned. Let the truth come out. What I believe in very strongly, what I think everybody on this table believes in very strongly, and probably most of you in the audience, that the best statement ever made about this was used as a title for one of Martha's brilliant books, and we haven't said enough about Martha's brilliant scholarship tonight. But the famous statement from Hillel, Im ein anili mili, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am for myself alone, what am I? And if not now, when? That has been my motto. It hangs in my office, and I will not compromise my views on Israel. I will learn from experience, and I will change my views, but I'm not going to let attacks on my general reputation based on perceptions of me being a conservative force me to change my views on Israel or on any other subject. So I think all of you here appreciate that and appreciate the difficulty of trying to strike a balance between undue parochialism, undue tribalism on the one hand, and universalism, which denies you the right to speak up on behalf of your own group when you think your own group is being treated unfairly. So I will continue along those lines for as long as I have the strength and power to do it. Thank you very much.
Professor Alan Dershowitz, the top lawyer of last resort, defender of free speech, fantastic illustration of its benefits, pursuing unusual and unpopular positions, defining chutzpah, taking a stand, all to the benefit of truth, illumination, and great arguments. I want to thank his family members who were here. I think that I'd love to know what goes on behind the closed door, but mostly I want to just applaud you for being here. And I want to thank Patricia Ranulo, who put together this wonderful day, and the forthcoming video that we're about to watch. And please join me in thanking this amazing panel.
Hi, Alan. Sorry I can't be with you today at this great celebration of you and your career, but as you know, the first Monday of October is a pretty busy time around here. You know, I think the first time I met you, it was 30 years ago now, and it was when I walked into your first-year criminal law class. I remember thinking I was the luckiest person in the world to have you as a criminal law professor, and indeed I was. For 30 years, you have challenged me, you've stimulated me, occasionally you've provoked me, but never once have you bored me. I have been awestruck all that time, as so many people there have been, by your creativity, by your wide-rangingness, by your sheer intellect. You've had an amazing career, Alan. Your scholarship, your lawyering, your teaching, in all kinds of ways, You've left your mark on legal and public policy debates. You've transformed a lot of lives along the way, and you should feel really proud of that career. But I hope what doesn't get lost today, amidst all the hoopla of the things you've done, is also the kind of person you are and what a gift for friendship you have. Underneath that public persona is one of the most caring, generous, genuine people I have ever met, and I am so proud, have been so proud to have had you as a teacher and as a colleague and as a lifelong friend. So Alan, whatever the next new thing is, all good luck to you. I know Harvard Law School is going to miss you.
Dean Minow and all the faculty and staff and members and alumni of the Harvard Law School, and the Dershowitz family, and you, Alan. God, this must sound like a eulogy, but I know that you're not retiring from anything. See, Alan Dershowitz can't retire. Alan Dershowitz is a force of nature. He just goes on and on. He has a sense of justice and the sharpness of his wits and the stoutness of his heart, and he always mobilizes them for the truth. He's been an unbelievable champion of law and justice and truth. He has marshaled these tremendous capacities of his for the defense of the Jewish people and the Jewish state time and time again. I've seen you do this, Alan, with tremendous courage, indefatigability, if I can use that word, tirelessness, absolute conviction, and absolute coherence and clarity. I've seldom seen anyone stand up so clearly for what he believes is right in the face of all odds. And that's the mark of greatness. And you have been a great champion of law, of truth, and of the state of Israel. You want peace for the state of Israel, and you want justice for the state of Israel. And I can tell you that your many admirers around the world, including in this country, salute you on this day and say 2 words: thank you. 3, thank you, Alan. And good luck.
I am happy to congratulate Alan Dershowitz and to commiserate with Harvard Law School on his retirement. Harvard will be a less interesting place without him. Alan is what is technically known as a shin kicker. That is to say, a natural contrarian. I tend to think that's a valuable quality, perhaps because I share it, but mostly because the herd instinct is one of the besetting sins of the intelligentsia. Dershowitz has swum against the tide in so many areas, from Israel to criminal procedure. He's not always right, but he almost always has points worth considering. And I even agree with him more often than, or he with me, more often than most people might imagine. Some years ago, I came up to Cambridge to participate, perhaps as a foil, in one of Alan's criminal law classes. It was a very enjoyable experience. The law school will miss him.
Alan, you're retiring. Well, your colleagues in the law will miss you. But I can remember, too, from that day when you were working for Justice Goldberg on Escobedo, on Murphy v. Waterfront. From that day till this, you've worked tirelessly. You've persevered throughout. You've worked intelligently. You've done your absolute best for what I think most of us would call the cause of justice in the law. And your production has been enormous in that respect, and much appreciated. I think I can talk for all the judges when they say, we appreciate what you've done. This day marks a great deal that you have done of good for the law of the country, your profession, and we expect much more to continue and to follow on from this.
Alan, I'm so sorry not to be here in person, but I did want to give my special congratulations on this momentous event and this, bittersweet, really, moment in your life. You have been so many things to all of us, but to me you've been one of my great heroes, one of the great lawyers of our time, youngest law professor at Harvard, a fearless defender of human rights, author of some brilliant books, a defender of Israel when Israel needed defense and too few people had the courage to do so. And you have fought the good fight for so many causes with real moral courage, totally indifferent and undeterred by the criticism you sometimes faced, that anyone faces who really wishes to speak the truth in a world that can't take too much of it at any one time. And you've been one of the great heroes. You've written wonderful books on Judaism, great books on Israel. And of course you tell the funniest jokes of any person I've ever met. In fact, my real favorite is the one you told me last time we met. You had apparently written a commentary on the book of Exodus. You sent it to your very religious uncle, rabbinical uncle, who read through it and said, Alan, I only want you to change one word in the book. And you said, what word? And he said, Dershowitz. Alan, this is so typically you. You are one of the heroes, moral heroes of my life. The way you've stood up for every cause that needed standing up for and lacked a voice, you have been that voice. Friends, I must tell you a little story. I happened to be reading on the web about 10 years ago the transcript of a speech Alan gave in defense of Israel at Berkeley, where it was quite courageous to do so at a time when there was a lot of criticism of Israel on campus. And I wrote you an email saying, Alan, you've been a real hero. I've read the speech. I thought it was terrific. You emailed me straight back and said, Chief Rabbi Sachs, you don't know what a favor you have done me. My mother was always telling me, Alan, you're not religious enough. Now I can show her an email from a chief rabbi. Well, listen, Alan, you've done us so many favors. You've been such a source of blessing. May God continue to bless you, and may you continue to be a shining light for truth, justice, and human rights for Israel and the Jewish people for many years to come.
Alan, Professor Dershowitz, I'm so sorry I can't be there with you tonight to celebrate your illustrious career. I am in such awe of you, have been so moved by your generous mentorship and advice over the years, and I wish you a wonderful, wonderful retirement, though I know you won't be resting much. Much love to you and your family.
Alan, I'm very sorry that I can't be there with you today. I'm on trial, and you know how that goes. But I welcome the opportunity to say a few words about your career and our relationship and how much I've enjoyed knowing you and working with you over these decades. And over these decades, I have told people, I think we first started working together in 1972, if I'm not mistaken, and I think you'll remember the case. Over the decades since 1972, I've told people again and again that pound for pound, Alan Dershowitz is the best lawyer I know. And the cases that we worked on reaffirmed that belief, reaffirmed that view, caused me to say it again and again, because it is undeniably, in my view, undeniably the truth. When I think of you, I think back to July 4th weekend, 1977. You were a young lawyer, and I was even younger, I should add. But July 4th weekend, 1977, was the weekend that we had two clients literally on the threshold of the marshal's door, the jailhouse door. We made an unsuccessful motion for bail pending appeal before the district court judge, and we were appearing, I think, before Judge Gibbons and the Third Circuit judge to seek bail pending appeal. And you got the idea that in order to prevail, there was only one thing we had to do. We had to put the entire brief together in final form and to make that the touchstone of our bail application to show that the appeal had merit. And as a result of that, we worked the entire night, the entire night of July 4th, and this is before Westlaw and before Word programs and before email and before Dropbox and every other digital advantage that we work with today. And in fact, I remember quite clearly that there was no air conditioning at the law firm that we were working from in New York. And it was a very difficult but ultimately rewarding a night because we were able to get bail pending appeal of the denial of the new trial motion and ultimately won the appeal itself. That was the result of your never give up approach to any case where a client's liberty is at stake. You never give up. That inspired me, and your inspiration has meant a lot to me over the years. It's fortunate that I got to know you. I value our friendship, and you certainly deserve all the praise and tribute that you get today. Good luck, my friend.
There is nothing that gives a teacher more pleasure than to see a student achieve things of which the teacher is not capable. Alan Dershowitz, from the very moment he stepped into my class, was the kind of student and human being whom you knew would do great things, and he has. And he has done them in ways which are totally his own. In doing this, he's remained a dear, dear friend. How I wish I could be at Harvard to help in honoring him today. I can't, but I wanted very much to send this message.
It's hard to imagine American Jewish life without Alan Dershowitz. It's very hard to imagine Jewish life in Boston without Alan's incredible presence. Alan is our teacher. He is the ultimate teacher of Torah and Bible and Talmud, but most of all, he is the ultimate teacher of the idea of justice. His idea of justice is informed by his Jewish background and deeply informs his idea of what it really means to be Jewish in the world. He's a friend to everyone who's in trouble. He's a friend to those who are oppressed. He refuses to accept the world's hypocrisy in their relationship with Israel, but he also is never blind to injustice in Israel, in the United States, or anywhere in the world. He's my hero.
Hi, everybody. I am so sorry that I can't join you all today to celebrate 50 years of teaching by one Professor Alan Dershowitz. I do have a good excuse, even an excuse that I think Professor Dershowitz would accept, which is that I am going to be in Congo, Rwanda, and Uganda during your celebration. But again, it's very much my loss. It would be very inspiring to hear all that everybody else has to share. I thought I would just say a few words about three of Alan Dershowitz's notorious passions. The first, the Boston Red Sox. Now, it used to be when Alan was a fanatic Red Sox fan and the Red Sox were incapable of winning, that one could associate his affection for the Red Sox with his other attachment to lost causes. But now one puzzles over how one squares his attachment with a two-time World Series victor and a playoff contender this year. By the time of your celebration, of course, you'll know more than I do about how they're faring in the 2013 playoffs. But all I can think is that now the Red Sox fortunes offer something of an antidote to some of Alan's other attachments and other causes. I think it was Earl Warren who said that he always reads the sports section first, because the sports section gives you people's achievements where the front page gives you man's failings. And so now we can explain Professor Dershowitz's ongoing attachment to the Red Sox as providing him with joy that sometimes world events does not afford us with. The second passion, the one that you're celebrating, I think, around the clock today, is Alan's passion for teaching. I am one of many who had the privilege of being taught by Alan Dershowitz while I was a student at Harvard Law School, and there are few experiences like it. He treats students like peers. When we submitted papers, I took a class called The Sources of Justice in the Bible. He devoured student papers as if they were sort of interpretations by Maimonides, and I assure you the quality was not close to that. He's always looking to learn, and that enthusiasm for learning from a teacher is completely infectious for the student body. He's one of a kind, and while he had all kinds of opportunities over the 50 years to do anything he wanted in the real world, Harvard Law School was always his base. It was always the place he came home to, and it was always a place that was foundational to all the work he did outside, and that's because teaching mattered just that much. Third passion almost goes without saying, because the word justice and the cause of justice is almost synonymous with Professor Dershowitz. He has long believed that law is the most powerful tool to stand up for the oppressed, stand up for those who have been denied the right of free speech, the right of free association, the right of freedom of religion. He has used law as a powerful weapon over many, many years, but also uses his voice and uses the pulpit in order to stand up for those who can't always stand up for themselves. So Professor Dershowitz, I and all of your former students, the legions of former students out there who have benefited so much from your care and from your passion for everything that matters to you, congratulate you on 50 years, and we look forward to many, many more years watching you in action, watching the Red Sox in action, and having you champion the cause of those who so appreciate your care and your leadership. Have a great day.
I know Harvard's been around for a long, long time, but I'm not at all sure it's going to survive as well after Alan leaves. 50 years of contribution, not just to Harvard, but to the entire country. Alan, you're the best. I'm proud to have known you for a long, long time. I think you have a great conscience. Thank you so much. Thank you.
First copy of my autobiography.
Oh, thank you.
Just got off the press today, and it's wow. Thank you, Dr.
Oh, hello. I'm Larry David. I'll wait for the applause to die down. Thank you. Thank you. Anyway, I can't tell you how happy I am to be part of this wonderful event. You know, it's not the first time there's been an event for Alan Dershowitz, but whatever, who's counting? As we all know, Alan is a very polarizing figure. People who know him and are his friend, well, they love him. People who don't know him and watch him on television defending psychopaths and murderers, not so much. Now, I'm in a completely different category because I'm actually a close friend who hates him. That's right. I cannot stand him. How can you like someone who every time you talk to him makes you feel like an idiot? The only time I ever feel stupid is talking to him. Every time I bring up something, he knows the answer to it. And he's right. He knows everything. He's a literal know-it-all. Even my best subject, baseball, he knows more than me. I'll mention some obscure player and he'll know all his statistics. It's infuriating. I go home and I take it out on my children. They go, "What's wrong with you, Dad?" I go, "Dershowitz." I mean, it's just not fair that someone can be so smart and so nice. He's too nice. Makes me sick. Makes me feel mean. I'm not mean, but I feel mean around him. If I tell somebody I'll do them a favor, they invariably say, "Oh, Dershowitz already took care of it." At least the one thing I thought I had going for me over him was I was funny. I don't know anymore. The guy knows a million jokes. Every time I see him and we're with a group of people, he's telling jokes and making everybody laugh. I hate this man. Then I thought, well, at least the one thing I always knew I could do was take him in a fight. When I see him, I'm always sizing him up. I'm bigger. I'm younger. I know I can take him. I mean, if push comes to shove, I could kick his ass. And then I find out someone was picking on Elon, and Dershowitz punched him in the face. I couldn't believe it. Now, on top of everything, I'm afraid of him. I never thought I'd say those words. I'm afraid of Dershowitz. You know, I know he's being feted tonight, okay? So what? What, he's retiring as a teacher? Hey, if retiring from teaching meant he moved to Israel and I never have to see or hear from him again, that would be great. But that's not the case. He's not going anywhere. He's still going to be everywhere, writing everything, reading everything, watching everything, knowing everything, punching people in the face. It's not fair. It's just not fair. Enjoy your evening.
So to Alan Dershowitz, who stands up for everyone, let's all stand up for Alan.
And thank you, Dean, for doing this. Thank all the people in your office for putting together that incredible video. It all took me by surprise. I didn't know about that. And thank my friends who came from New York and other places, my students, and all of you who took time out of your busy schedule. Thank you all so much.